The discussion today is climate change impact on tea sector and way forward. And we have been engaging with plantation sector over a long period of time. And as an environment organization, as a conservationist myself, and as an independent consultant, we have plenty of projects and activities we are doing with plantation sector. So it's a great honor having being able to. And also one important point, we also had differences of opinion with plantation sector when it comes to various topics, which is also a notable thing I should mention. So beginning the discussion, climate change impact on tea sector and way forward, I'm going to throw my first question to Mr. Uchita di Soyza. And uh, Mr. Uchita di Soyza is a thinker, author, and a strategist for the local and global climate sustainability transformation, with over 30 years of experience working in the public, private, and civil society sector. So he has a very good understanding in different sectors, especially when we speak of public-private partnerships. And he represented Sri Lanka during 2016 and 2017 as the chief negotiator for the UN High Level Political Forum and UN Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development in his capacity as Ministerial Advisor on Sustainable Development. Uchita is the chief architect of the Sustainable Development Goal SDG Transformation Lab and the executive director of Center for Environment and Sustainability. Said he has managed various projects on sustainable development, climate change, policy coherence, sustainable enterprise, integrated communications, etc. During the past 3 decades, he has contributed to hundreds of United Nations and their international conferences as a keynote speaker, presenter, facilitator, and a panelist. And I have also met him many a times before on various dialogues. Also, People's SDG review, People's review, independent People's review on SDG, etc. So it was a pleasure. It is a pleasure to welcome him on the panel. Okay, so my first question to Uchita today is, when we speak of climate change and the tea sector and the way forward, has Sri Lanka and the plantation sector, in your opinion, planned well for the impacts of climate change? That's the first part of the question. Do you believe that our plantation sector, especially the tea sector, has planned for climate change impacts? How resilient are systems and why are we so climate vulnerable? How resilient is our systems and why are we so climate vulnerable? So this is the question, which has two parts.
Thank you, Jayantha. First of all, we are sitting here uh, during a weekend, another weekend. The 27th COP was just concluded during the weekend. That is the Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC. Once again, there's a lot of noise and a little outcome. Out of the little outcome, one of the significant outcomes that came out through media was that finally, after 30 years since the Rio 1992 negotiations and the UNFCCCs, that a climate, what do you call it, resilient fund has been created. That is for climate, for
Loss and
loss
damage.
and damage. Now, there are three things. I'm trying to come to a point of Sri Lanka before I get to the bottom line of what we have to do in Sri Lanka and what we have to say about it. People talk about mitigation and adaptation, and loss of damage is the third component in any NDC or national determined contribution that a country will pledge to the global community through the UNFCCC. And if you read through the NDC of Sri Lanka, which came out, the latest one in 2021, you will see that Sri Lanka is an extremely vulnerable nation. Normally, during the past decade and a half, you see that we are rating ourselves in the first 10. Not the best rating to have, but we do have an unusual record of rating ourselves in the highest in the unwanted charts in the world. So why are we so vulnerable? So there is a global phenomenon. Part of it is that someone else has created this for Sri Lanka. That is, some people will call it a natural phenomenon. Some people will, a majority of the scientists in the world call it more anthropogenic climate change, so human induced. That is the first part of it. So we can say that, okay, we have a fund, we are going to get bailed out, IMF can do whatever they want to do, and we will get bailed out by this fund. It took 30 years to just simply agree upon a fund, and the fund is not going to give us for another 30. Right? The SIDS, the small island development states, are the ones who fought for it, not Sri Lanka. Now, come to the phenomenon inside the country. Why are we so vulnerable? Okay, we do understand climate change has taken place globally. But the second part is that Sri Lanka is one of the most fragmented planning nations on earth. In 2017, 16, I started as the advisor to the government, the only sustainable development advisor so far. They just disbanded it and never came back to it afterwards. The responsible agencies to implement the 169 targets. Forget about the 17 SDGs, we'll talk about it later. Now, there were 425 institutions that we mapped as a team who's responsible in the central government alone. Then we have 300 and whatever odd local governments, 9 provincial councils, and a whole heap of them to do all of this. Now, I'll give you one example. As when it comes to resilience in the SDGs, SDG, if I'm not mistaken, 1.5 under poverty, and SDG 15.1 under climate change, both talks about creating resilience. So the poverty related ministries will get their billions of money, and the climate change environment related will get their money, and they will sit separately and plan this. So we are not planning for resilience. We are planning for mere mud flapping, coating, and saving our day for the next 4-5 years. Climate change cannot be done like that. When I was invited, to be very honest, I tried to get myself out of this panel. I tried my best, I could not. Because the idea is not about the data and alone and keeping the data in your own databases. I tried to find as much as data for two weeks now. There's no single fact sheet related to the plantation sector and the climate impact on it. Not that there is not data, there is data. As you said, we have conducted now for 5 years the independent monitoring, evaluation and review when the country should do it or someone else should do it. Our information says that Sri Lanka is in a very bad path. Now, what it means, why is Sri Lanka so vulnerable? We have all the indicators from heat waves to floods to landslides to everything, but are we managing them? Well, no, we are not managing them well. Are we managing collectively as a nation, as a stakeholder in the plantations? No. Two documents I'll give you. The Nationally Determined Contributions NDCs categorizes the plantation sector with agriculture, right? Then the public investment program will categorize you in the same way. And if you look at the public investment program 2016, 2017 when the UN team came, basically I calculated and show for environmental protection only 1.2% was allocated for the entire country. You see, that is the first part. The second part, so please understand that when Sri Lanka is as vulnerable, the plantation sector obviously is vulnerable. But then the point is, the loss, when it comes to COP27, they were talking about, I just got this, that the agriculture sector, if to be relevant, can increase yields by 17% and reduce farm level greenhouse emissions by 21%. I went into 2 rooms, I just wanted to update myself honestly. I just wanted to update myself on what this discussion is about. And the first thing is about your dialogue also very critically needs to address the question as to whether climate change is impacting on the plantation sector, tea industry, vice versa, whether the tea industry plantation sector is impacting on climate change in this country. So I think both are important questions. I think both require research. Just because you have a research institute to just to provide information, data for your growth only, does not become valid. I'll come in the next round. I don't know whether I have taken too much of time. Okay, do I have more time? Okay, I'll take the next time available for me. Is because the first question is that are you going to bail this country out from the foreign currency crunch that we have as a plantation sector? The GDP, your contribution as plantation sector says it's only 2%. Then your validity and your in bailing Sri Lanka out before we go to prosperity, right? And latest from the current president is climate prosperity. I don't know whether you all saw this report, an old outdated document which is being promoted to get funds under climate change and have a university for capacity building. That is not what the country needs. The country needs capacity building where capacity building is. Scientists do different things. Capacity building is done differently. So the first point is that where is the collective information data to look at up to at least 2050? Because your climate change is not going to do your 2030, 2025 stuff. It is not going to. You're going to want to have transition plans for that. That is strategy. So the first thing is that where is your data? Why are people having their data hidden in a country which has the Right to Information Act? I mean, I was part of I was called, normally I'm called when somebody is in deep trouble. I can't use the word that I normally use. Of the ship that sank and, right, what is it called, Express Pearl, 40 scientists. I had to put in 17 researchers and coordinators to do that, and a whole couple of dozens of agencies. Not a single agency will corroborate with another agency to share their information. It's very sad. And I just had a walk with the chair in the Valley Park. Still the case is after 2 years in the burner, when we had given the report on by the 31st of December last year. So we had to withdraw. I had to withdraw. Others are there, right? So again, I'm asking, I'll come in the next round, and if there's questions, as to one, in a world order which had called for transformation by 2030, not to do with 2030, that is 2050, that is the Paris agenda. This is the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. What has the plantation sector done to say that climate change is affecting the tea industry, the plantation sector to exactly this point? And then what do we do to transform the plantation sector to be relevant to the current world order and the country's requirements? And secondly is that I will that for you the next round, not this round, to say as to how you are going to make climate action more relevant to the call of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so insightful, especially the question whether the tea sector is impacted by the climate change or the tea sector is impacting the climate change. Plus, the lack of data is two key takeaways for me as the moderator from Mr. Uchita's response. Thank you so much. And I move on to the next question to Mr. Thusitha Bandara, Director, Low Country Operations, Sustainable Research and Development, Bogawantalawa Tea Estates. Bogawantalawa is a lovely tea estate. I love traveling that side. Mr. Thusitha Bandara enrolled in the Faculty of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya in 2004. and graduated in 2008, obtaining a Bachelor's of Science degree in agriculture. Following an advanced course module in crop science, he enrolled in the Postgraduate Institute of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya, PGIA, for a Master of Science in Environmental Forestry in the Board of Study in Crop Science and graduated in 2012. Thusitha has obtained a Master of Business MBA Administration, and he is reading for a research PhD on building climate resilience in farming systems in sloping lands of South Asia. Very important because most of our tea estates and plantations are located in sloping lands. I hope that is even more interesting for us as well. Thusitha has also contributed his precious knowledge to the environmental sustainability stream through various valuable research and publications. Thusitha is working as the Director of Operations, Low Country, Sustainability Research and Development of Bogawantalawa Tea Estates, PLC. He also serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Lush Agro Private Limited, a sister company of Bogawantalawa Tea Estates. Let me move on to Mr. Izzadeen, who is the Senior General Manager Sustainability of Elpitiya Plantations PLC. Mr. Izzadeen studied at Trinity College, Kandy, and joined the plantation industry in 1984 as trainee assistant manager. He is currently the Senior General Manager of Elpitiya Plantations. Such a long career at Elpitiya Plantations. Mr. Izzadeen holds a BSc Special Degree in Plantation Management and a Masters in Plantation Crop Management. He is an FIPM member of the National Institute of Plantation Management. Izzadeen heads the sustainability team of Elpitiya Plantations, armed with hands-on experience in HR management. He is an innovator, mediator, counselor, and strategic solution finder with extensive knowledge of the plantation industry. My question to you, Mr. Izzadeen, is what climate change impacts are impacting the estate sector community? This is looking at the households and also the plantation community. What are the impacts of climate change felt by them?
Okay, thank you, Jayantha. And I think Thusitha and Uchita, both of them rattled around very well, giving a good briefing from the world scenario as well as the plantation per se, the good things and the bad things what climate change has done. And but as you said, I must just, if I'm to brief, I would say human beings are the most invasive species of animals in the world, where we have created enough disaster or enough damage to the environment which has brought about this climate change. So agriculture is basically on food, right? Food cannot be downloaded from the internet. Food cannot be just made in a factory unless it's grown. And climate and the environmental factors are the most important things in agriculture. So our plantation people will be the most endangered species in Sri Lanka if there is a problem of the climate. Why I say that endangered species is they are totally dependent on the plantation and the production within the plantation. Right. Why I call them species? They are different kettle of fish. If you look at plantation sector, they are like almost encapsulated a group of people working together to bring something back to this country. Very hard working. But they are impacted very much due to climate change. One thing is mainly economically impacted. Where when there is climate change, whether it's drought, whether it's heavy rain, whether it's thunder, whether it's storm, whatever, they are the most vulnerable people. Where they work in the field. Unlike in other countries where they have, precision agriculture or close to environmental agriculture, these are mass scale agriculture what we are doing in plantations, and people have to get to the field to work. So when they are in the field, they can get exposed to all sorts of environmental hazards. And due to that, they can fall sick, they can come across accidents, and they can be not able to do their job, not perform, not economically viable, putting them to work on some days like that. So these have created a lot of issues in the plantations. For instance, if there is heavy thunder or storm, people will avoid coming for work. Humanly, yes, it's a need, right? But now in the rubber sector, if you take rain, heavy rain, no tapping. In the tea sector, if the weather is overcast for a period of time, you will find that there is no crop coming in. So all those things were explained by Thusitha very well, what climate needs. But overall, if you look at how you can mitigate this and how you can support this, is by having alternate arrangements, looking at the positives like Thusitha said, what are the good things which we could develop. As you said, the soils, the temperature of soils have gone up, then photosynthesis has gone up, there will be more crops. But what are we going to do to ensure that we get the maximum out of that? That will be the most important area what we will have to look at, and our plantations, as a plantation company, we have taken steps to look at the best possible scenarios to overcome these situations and make sure that the people can work even if there is adverse weather. Right. Very simple things, some simple things what we have done, we have given them protective equipment. Right. Or we have to look at what is the next alternative we can look at, where climate change is going to be there and it is going to come even worse. We are not going to stop anywhere. Right. So climate change will be certainly happening. We were talking of Sri Lanka being affected the most, but if you look at our GHG emissions, we don't emit that amount of GHG compared to the other countries. So we are victims of circumstance, right? So we are trying to do something to get through. Just to wrap up, I must say, if you look at the temperature, 2021 has had the highest temperature in the world, that is 54.4 in California, right? And the world emits about 50 billion tons of GHG emission. Right? Whereas if you take Sri Lanka, it's just almost nothing, very small. Right? So we have to live with this. These are problems which will be there, which we have to take on. Only thing is adaptation. We will have to adapt and see what differently we can cultivate in our lands. If tea is a problem, then what next? If rubber is a problem, what next? Right? So that the people in the plantations, I would say the community in the plantations, who are really shedding their blood for the industry, not only for the industry, for the country, maybe that our contribution on the GDP is not much, but it is 100%. We don't use any other resources. We generally put in, except the fertilizer, I would say, right? The others are just harnessed out of our soils. So we have to look at alternatives and support them to build, like we are trying to find resilience to overcome climate change, we'll have to find resilience to overcome problems of the plantation workers. And it should be permanent. So with the next round, we'll see what we can add on. I think it's time. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Izzadeen. Very interesting points, especially the fact that climate change is inevitable, but that how we adapt is the prime concern. And plus, you being a sustainability professional yourself, looking at the communities and the households, what can the plantation sector do to improve their life or to adapt in the face of climate change is interesting. And also that uh, when it comes to climate change adaptation, and also there are certain, I'm pretty sure that you're already looking at, there are certain ways and means in terms of mitigating and probably improving uh, in fighting the climate change impact is another area. But altogether it's very interesting, insightful information. And one other thing I liked most as a takeaway is that giving protective equipments, because, and also looking at certain overcast days, rainy days, and drought affected days where the community cannot work and difficult to work, and therefore their earnings will go down, their monthly targets may not be achieved. And to address that, which will have a chain effect in their whole family situation, can be avoided, like you mentioned, supporting them with whatever the protective equipments and things like that. Simple things, but very valid points to note. Thank you for your insights. And then I move on to Watsala Jayamanna. I need to highlight that when we decided on questions, we only knew who we are going to have in the panel and who they are. I haven't seen the profile. I didn't see the profile when we were thinking about what sort of questions we are going to ask. But interestingly, the question that you're going to get, Watsala, is actually something that's very related to you. So, when I speak of Watsala Jayamanna, is a development professional with over 19 years of experience in emergency response, disaster risk reduction, and climate action in Sri Lanka and abroad. She is currently the program officer in charge of emergency response, disaster risk reduction, and climate change at UNICEF Sri Lanka. Watsala worked with the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA, before joining UNICEF, coordinating humanitarian responses to the conflict affected resettlement and sudden onset disasters in the country. Watsala has a master's degree in sustainable international development from the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University, USA, and a bachelor's degree in law, LLB, from the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. She is passionate about environment conservation and firmly believes that the children should be given resilient capacities to engage in climate action from childhood. Uh, why I said Miss Watsala is that when we designed the questions, and it's, I think, very appropriate. My question to you is: what steps are the best options or solutions available to deal with climate change impacts on plantation sector, with a focus on plantation community, especially children and women? So once again, to basically simplify, what do you think we can do in terms of improving the community, especially children and women, to face climate change impacts along with disasters that come in? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayantha. So I'll briefly mention about the human impact of climate change, especially for children and women, because we had a great experts talking about the impact to the sector. But when you talk about the temperature increase, how the temperature is changing, now you see the dengue, prevalence of dengue in Nuerelia or even higher altitudes is becoming a normal scenario now, which we didn't hear when we were growing up. So the pests are also migrating along with the increase of temperature, and children and women, especially plantation sector workers, are at high risk of dengue. Even today, it's becoming a pandemic in Sri Lanka. More than 54,000 people were affected by dengue this year alone within these 11 months. So that's one way. On the other hand, more than 90% of the diseases caused by climate change is affecting children under 5. So that's a huge component of how climate change affects children. So in answering your question, Jayantha, I think the first thing is to understand how climate change affect not only the sector but also the sector workers, which is the largest population in the country. I mean, 60% of the plantation industry's production cost is labor cost. So a resilient workforce means your sector becomes more resilient to climate change. And if you look at all the plantation, whether low country or up country, geographic locations, majority of them are landslide prone. In Badula district alone or even Nuerelia, it's very hard to find a land plot which is not landslide risks, either low, moderate or high. So, and in addition with rainfall changes, the wet zone is becoming more wetter and the dry zone is becoming drier. So how it affects your plantation sector, I don't have to explain, but along with it, the the majority of the workforce is women in the plantation sector and their children are affected in the sense number of days they are losing schools, their nutrition, which we had a discussion in the previous panel discussion, the nutrition, food security, everything, even protection when the mothers are away working, the children who are left behind at home are at a risk of child protection issues, which in the previous panel discussion we discussed in this very room. In addition, now we see a great migration of laborers within the country from estate sector to urban cities, migrating workers from the plantation sector for employment opportunities. It's not only due to climate change, but many other factors involved. So they're migrating, and then our outward migration, meaning abroad migration, has increased more than 250% within this year alone. So many parents are migrating, leaving behind not only children, but a lot of socio-economic issues at home in terms of children. So the best solution, and then in a UNICEF we have U-report mechanism. That's a tool we use to engage young people and children to share their voices and ideas with us related to their relevant areas. In one U-report regarding climate change, what we heard was not many children or youth are aware of climate change or bothered about climate change in Sri Lanka. So lack of understanding is a main issue about this huge global crisis. Many people might say, okay, so glaciers are melting. What does it mean for a person in Nuerelia? A small plantation in Nuerelia. What does it mean? Glaciers are melting. Who cares? That's the attitude sometimes we hear, especially among youth and children, because their focus is either education or employment, their future. So even for plantation sector, answering Uchita's two questions is very important, I believe personally, and that for that you need to improve your research and development component and share information with wider audience who can, because climate change and building resilience is everybody's business. No single agency of one single government or one company can do it alone. It's everybody's business, yours and mine included. So to be able to help each other, we should know each other's issues, understand it, and then come together as a global community or a country to resolve the issues. So understanding the issues, not only for the sector, but for your workforce also, and building resilience among your workforce with better policies, better well-being policies, and support to the community who are in your sector. That would be my 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vatsala. Two key important points: building awareness. Not many people know what climate change is, and the issue, in my opinion, is that we haven't contextualized it, in the sense that we haven't put it into context and make the estate community understand what climate change is, because this global phenomenon of climate change that everybody speaks of, the western communities and the white men and all of that, and in big conferences, and then when it comes to a country like us, a developing country or mid-developed country or a country in a far corner in the world, that how you make children, the youth, and others in general public understand what climate change is. I think that is what we need to do, and highlighting that point is very important, whilst understanding that people don't understand what climate change is, how we basically make them understand, contextualize it to the own local realities is a good thing to do, good thing to harp on and try and promote. So for that, I think, talking of solutions, I think the plantation companies think of that, that everybody can help also, as to how we make the employees, the women, the children, the plantation communities understand in their own language what climate change is, what it could do to you, and what it eventually can contribute or attribute to the entire economy, because 10% of the population of the country lives in tea plantation areas, and 15% of our forex earner is this industry. So it's huge, it's big, it has been the biggest, and unfortunately, the apparel sector, the tourism sector, and all of that basically took over. And the second point about the research, the lack of data. I was a part of, just one of my personal experience, I was a part of a research in the Knuckles area. All river basins we mapped, and we wanted river rainfall data. The Met department didn't have it, or didn't have the updated information, unfortunately. I don't know what happened, but we had to approach the plantations to get these rainfall data, and there were some plantations voluntarily gave us all the rainfall data in the Knuckles, Hunnas Giriya, and towards the Mimure area, some of these plantations, and on the other side, Kala, Bokka, and all these plantations on Al Kadua side, etc. So we got information from the plantations. So it's important that the plantations have these data very much updated. If there is a way that these data that is already available with plantations that can be shared publicly, I think it's going to make a huge impact altogether. Okay, so thank you so much for the first round of questions and all the responses, which I think opens up our brains and hearts and minds to think of the whole climate change and its potential impacts, and its impacts on the communities, and what can the plantation sector do to both adapt and mitigate. What I don't want to do is that continue on the second round and have just one question thrown at the audience. So I'm going to stop at the first round now. I'm going to take some questions from the audience and make it more interactive, and then move on to the second round question. I think we have about another 20 minutes. So let's take some questions. Any questions, please?
Great, thank you. I'm Patrick Van Brian from the Development Partner Secretariat. Thank you very much for this really interesting event and panel discussion. Can I ask a bit of a silly question? Now, I heard two speakers at some point, I think Mr. Izzadeen and also Mr. De Souza. Mr. Izzadeen was speaking about alternatives also to, if I understood well, to looking at alternatives and in terms of crops, etc. And I was wondering, is there any alternatives to tea? Is there any any things, or partially, should we reduce the production of tea and look at other things? Has anybody look into it? Can we? It's a bit of a silly question, but still, I was trying to Google hydroponics. Can we do tea hydroponics? I couldn't find anything on the Google. Can we look at out of the box solution? I'm not a great fan of carbon credit because I know that's a way for those who pollute to kind of get off the hook. But can Sri Lanka earn more from carbon credit if we put forest instead of if we reforest instead of tea? And I mean, so I don't know. Any reaction to all of this? Thank you.
It's not a silly question. I think it's a very serious question you asked, right? On the outset, I must tell you that what I meant by alternative crops is, as Thusitha rightly said, some of our lands have got degraded, and the tea root is about, now we go for VP, so it's about 1.5 to 2 feet, right? So we'll have to look at alternative crops which can go deeper down and get better profits. Now, our company, we have done a lot of diversification, I must tell you. We have gone into different crops like coffee, we have gone into agar wood, we have gone into pineapple as a short crop, bamboo as a fuel wood, right? And also we have gone into forestry, and we have already looked at like rejuvenating our forests, looking at the streams where we can build back our catchment areas. Right? So we have done a lot. I don't think plantations are unsustainable because they have been there for over 150 years now. If they were unsustainable, they wouldn't have survived now. But we have to think a while and see what is the next and what can we do, because the labor force is diminishing. The climate changes also has effects on plantations. People's livelihoods are being affected. So what is the next? What is the next alternative? Can we do it? We can definitely do it. Your question was very valid, because that is the way forward. We will have to look at a holistic approach, not get into like, okay, tea and only tea. Sri Lanka is famous for tea, very good. Let's have the tea. And why not some coffee? Why not some berries? Why not some fruits? Which will be alternative source, which will give better livelihood, which will have less effect on climate change. So, as Thusitha said, the climate is changing. Upcountry is becoming a little warmer. So, why not we go for better crops there? Maybe in another 10 years, oil palm might come up in upcountry. We don't know. Who knows? Right? Sri Lanka people say oil palm is banned. Okay. But if you look at the reality, it's a good crop. I don't think, can anybody say that there is no water in any of the Galle district or where oil palm is cultivated? There are more water resources than everywhere. And the rainfall also has increased in those areas. So, it is not myths. We must not go on to myths. We must not go on to, decisions made out of the heart, but we should really think, work the figures, and do alternatives. Thank you for your question, and I think it was a good question and very valuable question where we have to look at different settings. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the questions. Let me begin the second round, and let's discuss solutions in a way. This session unfortunately is going to be very short in terms of the responses. So I invite all the panelists to limit your answers, if possible, to 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes or to 3 minutes, so that I could give the audience another round of questions, if possible. Okay, the first question goes to Uchita. How should Sri Lanka and the plantation sector address climate change towards achieving sustainable development? That's the first part of the question. What transformative action is required, including mitigation and adaptation measures. Thank you.
Okay. Number one, I'll limit it to three broad responses. First is that the plantation sector, and if it is the tea sector today, needs to be relevant to rest of the world, what the sustainable development transformation is asking from us. And Sri Lanka is one of the 193 nations signatories to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So 100 years, if something landed on your lap and that you think that you can enhance the pocket a little bit more and for another 100 years, that is when you start digging your grave much deeper. Sri Lanka, in its context, if you put into the context of climate change, then what is the development transformation that we need? Number one, there is a food nutrition crisis in this country, which is a global crisis as well. And who's going to feed it? Do you expect the government to keep on subsidizing? No, it is not going to happen. IMF will not allow that if the government wants to still. So, what is the component portion of your nutrition that whatever your products are going to give? Sri Lanka continues to say that we have 29% of forest land, which is completely untruth, right? They wanted to have another 3%, 32%, which is political nonsense. We have less than 20%. And when you take land, large scale land, and convert it into monocropping without thinking what the transformation required in the next 50 years is that you are killing your potential for sustainability, survival, and forget about nutrition, right? That is the first part that I wanted to say. In that sense, the second part is that whether we as a collective, I'm talking the plantation sector embedded in the national planning processes, not anywhere else. Now you see that the national planning processes will keep a sector in a space that they want to keep. But then the stakeholders want to keep it in another sense because they look after, if you're looking after 10% of the population, taking 20% of the land, whatever, it has to be significant and planned through foresight. Foresight can't be for 4 years and 5 years. That has a political mandate. It has to have 2030 is the last, 2050 is your closest gate that you can do transformation, and you need to look at this. So your R&D must be not just current, but futuristic. Your data collection and your data analysis and your tabulations and your trends analysis must give you foresight. Not just to survive now and to increase 500 rupees or 1000 rupees and brag about it. There's a lot of people, as Watsala said, which is below the minimum level of human consumption in some of the sectors. And if you don't think of that and you think of yield and the number of the forex input, you're just screwing a nation through the wayside. And that is what we have done. Final point, financing for climate sustainability. Look, yes, after 30 years, COP came up with a loss and damage fund. It is fought by the SIDS, the small and development islands, not Sri Lanka's. Sri Lanka is not even a SID. The problem is we gave up on the G77's power that we had. We used to advise the G77 strategically win for our countries, and we are losing on that. Basics and BRICS and have taken over for that. Now, impact investment, your R&D from your CSR to ESGs needs to be much more profound. I'm very glad that at least CSR is getting a little outed and ESG is paying a little bit more attention. But does ESG provide for sustainability? Is your R&D strengthened? And are you putting your money? Why can't we have a loss and damage fund here in the sector? Why isn't the sector? I heard there's a trust, a PhD, or whatever there. But where is this? When you reach out, it is not just the 1.5 million or 1 million or whoever. We all get impacted when we pay our taxes or when we take the services out of it. So, number one, finally is that Sri Lanka, I'll leave a copy of my last book here on a domestic resource mobilization framework 2020 that we did. You know, we have spelled out all this. There's data in it. There's strategy in it. Where are the governments and stakeholders who look into foresight, strategy, data, and future. So I wish you all the best going forward, and I hope that people in Sri Lanka have the same wishes as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uchita. And interesting points. I will summarize it at the end because I love some of these comments, especially talking about local loss and damage. Move on to Ms. Izzadeen. It's pretty much the same question, but in a different way. Looking at the sector altogether, what what can the plantation sector do proactively to ensure the plantation sector is well on track addressing related sustainability targets, SDG targets, mostly looking at climate change impacts? Proactively, what can the sector do? Thank you.
I think Thusitha has already answered most of my the answers what I should be giving. So I would say, as a country, what we have taken forward is the 2030 initiative on the roadmap on Ceylon tea, and we are looking at the rubber industry and other related industries, where we are lining up what should be done and what should not be done, and what are the things we have to develop, and what are the areas we have to look at sustainably in accordance to the SDGs. And also we are looking at, okay, what are the economic takebacks what we can get, what are the social givebacks what we have to do, and what are the environmental developments what we have to do. So these will be the way forward for the industry. And as Thusitha said, most of the companies are looking at it positively, because our survival is totally dependent on the climate. And we have, if you take Elpitiya plantation, we have about 35,000 people, human beings living in our plantations, who are dependent totally on the plantations. So we have to really work on, climate mitigation, because we have to survive. We have to feed those mouths. That's why I said we have to change our. Only thing is we have to stop, think, change, and adapt ourselves into different areas. Maybe like, okay, why I said fruit is nutrition. Why I said bamboo is fuel wood. Without cutting the forest, we use that there. Why I said development of intercropping is not only tea. You look at another crop which will, okay, when tea climate, if there is a difference in the climate and the tea crops come down, there will be another crop which will substitute. So these are the ways forward. Actually, there should be a master plan for the country, for the plantation industries, whole industry, as to what transformation should be done within the next few years. We can't, do plans, keep it in the cupboard. Plans should be workable plans, not huge books, not huge documents, right? Basic research, I would say not very depth research. Basic research is very important first. Just outline, and then decide, then go into details and work on it. Right? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And quickly, final question to Watsala. Watsala, what are the family-friendly and climate-friendly initiatives the plantation sector can take to ensure that the life of the plantation community is improved while achieving their growth targets? Obviously, with a focus to disasters, because that's your area.
Thank you. I think the definition for family-friendly policies were given by Ines during the inaugurations. Basically, it's maintaining work-life balance. So paid parental leave, both maternal and paternal inclusive. Support for breastfeeding, affordable, accessible, quality childcare. All these majority plantation companies are practicing, but improving those things while understanding your community's need. One thing to bring about from climate change and the new generations is that climate change is not only about increasing floods and disasters, it's have now seeped into our very hope of survival as well. Not only among us, but children and the next generation who's bearing the brunt of the climate change. I mean, we are older generation now compared to them. We are going to die soon, but they are going to bear the brunt of climate change longer than us. So in UNICEF, a global study done with more than 240,000 youth in the world, they said, they are the first generations to say, they are reconsidering having families, meaning having children, because of climate change. They have suffered enough with food security issues, nutrition issues, flood and drought, so they don't want to reproduce, meaning they don't want to have more children or have any children at all. That's the new millennials. And then the millennials, you know, are the job hopping generations. They work not for career but for more flexibility and better payment. So as Uchita said, whatever the plantation sector can do in research, it has to have a foresight. Understand your communities, my first comment. Understand your workforce under better family policies and better productivity among your workforce, and resilient workforce will result in a resilient sector, not only about the plants and company sustainability, but your workforce sustainability as a overall community affected by climate change. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, if all the panelists, for your input. And fortunately, I had a plan to open up this session, second session, also for questions, but there is a time constraint. I hope the panel is available for you to ask questions during the lunch, and afterwards they'll be sticking around. So ask your questions with from them when they are here. And as a summary, let me take a minute. What we looked at is what are the climate change impacts on the tea sector, plantation sector, and its impacts on the community and the company and children, and as well as women. And we try to understand different perspectives of the company, from the company's point of view, and also from experts such as Uchita, who have been in this international dialogue, and trying to understand what gaps are available and whether we are properly looking at the sustainability, climate change and its impact, and are we doing proactive work. Finally, what Uchita said is that, for instance, looking at some of these aspects, like what merely CSR a decade ago has now changed into ESG. Now we are looking in a broader term. Are we doing enough as plantation companies in terms of ESG, or are we still in the age of CSR? And we are also looking at what proactive actions the plantation sector can do. For instance, we know when the British used to do plantations, they did it in a very methodical manner. And also looking at emissions, most of these plantations are located in our hill country and in wet zone areas where all the forests were cut down so that we have plantations. Now, in the international stage, at COP and in different UN sessions, the world is demanding, countries such as us, Sri Lanka, India, and all the other countries that were colonized are demanding for loss and damage by the British and other colonization countries that colonized us for cutting down our forest. So when Uchita mentioned the fact that having a local loss and damage, for instance, now some of the damage that has happened, obviously not the plantation companies that are responsible, but the British that did. And can we look at a way that we can probably going, like Thusitha mentioned, negative carbon tree, or climate friendly, climate positive tea, or some product of that nature that comes as a solution. And finally, we can't hang on to certain myths, like Mr. Izzadeen mentioned. For instance, 29% of a forest cover is just a myth, like Uchita mentioned. What we have is about 9,800 square kilometers of forest, which is compared to 65,610 square kilometers, roughly about 17%. We don't have a 29% of a forest cover. If we think that we have a 29% of a forest cover and work towards and make our strategies to work with that statistics, then we are going to get lost. Finally, in COP in 2016, we presented NDC, in which we had a separate segment on the plantation sector. What we are going to do as plantation sector. For instance, looking at reforesting all the unproductive plantation lands and make them forests. Where are we now? Not even in the NDC anymore. Are the plantations in line with that? So these are the questions that we have. Not changing tea into oil palm, from oil palm to desert palm like dates is the solution. We have to look at what are the mitigatory steps that we can take and also adaptive steps obviously with along with the climate change, and look at proper solutions, and like Uchita said, look at more ESG focus than CSR focus, and work towards the towards addressing the impacts and also mitigate climate change impacts. So it's a very fruitful discussion. I think different perspectives were presented here, and I hope everybody enjoyed the session. Thank you so much for contributing with questions, and for the panel also finally putting their thoughts across and making us aware of what the plantation companies and the sector is doing altogether. Thank you again.